in. Welcome to our breakout session today, our breakout session C3, Purchasing Through the Lens of Climate Change Strategies and Best Practices. I am so delighted today to be talking with Sophie, Attwood, and Michael Kahn about how food's impact on climate change shapes menu development and purchasing strategies. They'll both be taking questions at the end of the session, so feel free to use the session chat on the right-hand side of your screen to submit your questions. Our first presenter is Sophie Attwood, who is Senior Behavioral Scientist at the Better Buying Lab, part of the World Resources Institute, where she develops, tests, and scales food service interventions that encourage diners to switch to plant-based alternatives from meat. Her latest publication, WRI's Behavioral Playbook, summarizes the most up-to-date research on consumer behavior change for more sustainable diets. So she is the expert to go to on this one. Let's bring Sophie Attwood up to the stage to share her insights with us. Hi, Sophie.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Good stuff, we got the text sorted.
Yes, indeed.
Cool. And are you okay to run the slides, Jacquelyn?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try to keep up with you, but just let me know if you need me to advance or go back.
All right, well, hello everyone who's watching. If you could just move on to the next slide. And I wanted to talk through, yeah, here we go. I'm not sure if you guys can see that one okay, but this is just an intro slide to explain a little bit about who I am. So I work for a group called the Better Buying Lab, which is part of the World Resources Institute. And as Jacquelyn mentioned, we work on the issue of trying to promote more sustainable plant-based diets. And the way we work is to use methods and theory from the field of behavioural science, along with insights from a series of food industry partners, many of whom are listed on this slide. And we work to develop some consumer behaviour change strategies, which are grounded in the research evidence, designed to have practical applicability so we can use them in real life food service settings to create the change that we want to see. Next slide. And that change is shown here on this slide. So we're particularly interested in trying to get a shift away from people consuming a lot of ruminant meat, particularly beef, and into more plant-based foods. And the reasons why we're particularly interested in this shift is because, as you can see from the chart on the left, beef is a very resource inefficient food. So when we look at gram per gram, the amount of greenhouse gas emissions produced by beef, it's actually around 20 times higher per gram of protein than it is for some common plant-based foods, you can see in that graph. And then the two circles you see on that right-hand slide there, what this one is showing is that if you look at the red portion of the diagram here, beef makes up actually just only about 4% of the US diet, but that 4% is the equivalent to almost 50% of food-related greenhouse gas emissions. So beef really is having a disproportionately damaging effect on the environment when you think about it as a percentage of the diet. The kind of general conclusion of this really is that we have any hope of reaching the goals of the Paris Agreement, and that's to try to keep global warming within a safe operating space of around 1.5 degrees centigrade. What we really need is a kind of rapid and widespread shift away from beef. So we need people to cut down, especially true of high consuming countries like Europe and the US. Next slide, please. So this message is one that is getting much more media coverage in recent years. These are a couple of the headlines that I've pulled off the internet just in the last month or so. And the good thing about that means that consumers are becoming much more aware of the issue of beef. So if you talk to people a couple of years ago about this, they probably wouldn't have had no idea. Whereas nowadays, I think quite a lot more people are aware that there's an environmental issue around high meat consumption. If we move on to the next slide. Despite this, however, when we look at surveys which are exploring different reasons why people buy the food they buy, what we tend to find is that environmental concerns still rank relatively far down the list of reasons. So in this sample of 500 people from the UK, environmental concerns are actually fifth on the list of reasons of things that people think about when purchasing food. And they're quite far behind some key purchase drivers, things like taste and perceived quality of the food. Next slide. And that's true in general, but also true when we put the information directly in front of people. So here's a study that's looking at food labels and how people use the information in the content of food labels. And what this basically shows, if you have I'm not sure if you can entirely read that, but people very rarely use food label information to have a look at the environmental impact of the food that they're consuming. They're much more likely to have a look at food labels and think about things like price or ingredient lists. So even when you put the environmental footprint or information about the food directly on the pack in front of the consumer, they're still relatively uninterested in using that information to drive their purchase decisions. Next slide, please. So the general conclusion of this is that informing people about the environmental impact of beef doesn't really get very far in influencing them towards choosing more plant-based dishes. And because of this, in 2019, what we did at WRI is we wanted to create a guide for use in food service that summarised the full range of different options that we could use beyond just informing people to get them to change their dietary choices when dining out in food service, restaurants, cafes, canteens, in their workplace, for example. And we published this document back in January. It's open access and it's available on our website. So the contents are freely available to use. In the link there, if you go onto WRI, type in the Better Buying Lab playbook, and you should be able to find that document. We created the document. You just go back a slide, just quickly. I'm just talking about that orange diagram there, just as a bit about our methodology. We did a large review of the literature. We also spoke to a lot of people working in the food service industry to get their input. We used all this together to come to a long techniques that people can use in food service to influence diners. And then once we'd done that, we actually subjected that long list to an industry survey. We got representatives, about 100 representatives from food service, to have a look at our list of techniques and actually rank them for us. So on to the next slide. This slide here gives you an indication of what people thought about the different techniques. We had 57 behaviour change techniques in total within the playbook that we'd found from literature and talking to people. We clustered these into five categories, which we called our 5P framework. The P's in this case are representing the target of the intervention. So was the intervention focusing on people or the staff in a food service setting? Was it focused on the product itself, placement, promotion, or presentation? And they're clustered in different colours on that graph. And what we asked our sample to do was think about how feasible they thought the technique was and how impactful they thought it was likely to be. So did it work? And the results are plotted against each other on this graph. The interesting point for us is this top right-hand corner, the shaded square, which contains the techniques that actually ranked above average on both those criteria according to our sample. There was 23 in total there. On to the next slide, listed here. This might be a bit small and a bit quick to go through, but they're all listed in the playbook if you want to go take a look. These are our top ranking kind of best bet techniques. And so that's kind of a good list to have of things that we think that are really impactful and really feasible to do in food service settings. And they're all in one place now in the playbook. And I've highlighted one technique here. It's using descriptive language to promote plant-based food. The reason why I've highlighted it is because beyond the guide, what we've also been working on at the Better Buying Lab is looking at ways to understand which of these techniques work really well in food service according to actual evidence. So we've been running trials ourselves. And a lot of our work has focused on this highlighted technique. Interestingly, this was the one that also came out #1 in our ranking. We didn't rig it, but that's the way it went. And what I just want to do in the last couple of slides is summarise some of that research so you have an idea of the types of evidence that we've generated around this particular technique. So this slide here refers to a trial that we ran in around 38 cafes across the UK that were owned by the supermarket chain Sainsbury's. And what we did with Sainsbury's is we chose 3 dishes off their canteen menu, and we worked with the staff there to develop some new names for those dishes when we tried to make those new names much more descriptive and appealing than the original names. And then what we did is over an 8-week period, we tracked sales of those dishes. And then in a small group of the cafes, 10 in total, we actually changed the original names to these new descriptive names and then tracked sales of the dishes over another 8 weeks. And we compared these to the sites where we hadn't changed the names. And what we found was our new descriptive names actually led to quite significant upticks in the number of consumers who were willing to try these vegetarian dishes on the menu. So having a look at this graph, the black line that's going horizontal is actually the baseline of what happened in the cafes where we didn't change the names. And the bars represent the uptick in sales when we use more descriptive language. Some of the names work better than others, as you can see, because the bar's higher. But the blue middle category there, that was one of our most effective names. It was Cumberland Spiced Vegetarian Sausage and Mash. And that actually led to a 75% uptick in the number of diners who went for that vegetarian dish on the menu, which is a significant amount. Have you gone to the next slide? Similarly, around the same time, we ran a trial with US bakery chain Panera. And we worked with the guys at Panera to rename their vegan black bean soup on their menu. And the team at Panera developed 2 different names, which they considered to be more descriptive. We had slow simmered black bean soup that we tried out in a group of Panera stores in the Nashville market. And then we also had the name Cuban black bean soup, which we tried out in some stores in the LA market. And we did a similar design where we tracked sales over a period of time, and this time compared it to the year previous and had a look at what the difference was. And what we found here was that actually slow simmered black bean soup didn't work at all, with no uptick in sales, which was quite interesting. But we actually found quite a significant uptick when we used the name Cuban black bean soup. So it was a 30% rise in year-on-year sales soup in that region. So another kind of win for descriptive language as a technique to promote plant-based food. And then lastly, this is a trial that we've been running quite recently with the guys at Google Food. So we've been working with the team there to develop more appealing names for their vegetarian dishes on their menus. We worked with the local teams to design new names. So on the right-hand side of that box there, an example of some of the creative exercises that we use to get to more descriptive language. And we tested these names, example in the left-hand side there. So from tomato soup to Provençal slow roasted herbal tomato soup, a bit more descriptive. We tested these names out across 5 of their global offices, and we tracked, once again, the amount of food taken in each of these plant-based dishes. This trial had quite a significant uptick in the amount taken, 35% increase we found across the board when we introduced this more descriptive language. So once again, good evidence this approach really works. So that's good for language. And now we're working on in 2021 a few more of our techniques independently to go have a look at what happens when we actually introduce these into restaurants. But I just wanted to talk through this quickly. So since the beginning, last slide, Jacquelyn, since the beginning of this year, what we have actually been doing is working on a process or a system that we can use with restaurants to promote more to get them to help build a tailored behaviour change strategy. So we've been working with sites to diagnose kind of what they're currently doing in terms of behaviour change, through a workshop process with them where we can recommend a series of the behaviour change strategies that are laid out in the playbook to come to a strategy that's specifically tailored and relevant for that site. We've run this now with about 14 different food service organisations globally. We're finding some quite good results, and it is a really useful way to have a structured approach to thinking through a behaviour change strategy for sustainable food. And on that note, I'll pass back over to Jacquelyn.
Thank you very much, Sophie. And I'm sorry to rush you at the end there, but we will have some more time for questions with Sophie following Michael's presentation. So, and I think Michael will be building upon Sophie's presentation. So, as I said, that's a great segue into our next presenter, Michael Kahn, who is the Global Culinary Strategy and Development Lead for Google Food Programs, where he focuses on guiding a culture of food innovation, sustainability, equality, and productivity. Michael joined Google just this year and previously worked in high-end restaurants and hotels across the country, as well as the New England Culinary Institute and Harvard Dining Services. Let's bring Michael up. And again, just another reminder, both Michael and Sophie will be taking questions following Michael's presentation. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Michael.
I guess good day is the generic worldwide greeting. I'm Michael, glad to be with you all. So we have at Google have been working with Sophie's team at WRI for many, many years, and the behavioral science has really worked. We start at a baseline of procurement and then lead it through to customer interaction, consumer satisfaction, and their change. So we really start at procurement and let our dollars help change and be the vote for change. A lot of what we're doing is based on getting back to balance. Next slide, please. So as chefs and food service professionals, I think it is incumbent on us to really lead the charge and to change the food service that we know and we have known in the last decades, and to make it, again, balance is really where we need to be, and I feel that we're out of balance. We look at the next slide, we can see that the impact of current production methods, primarily big agriculture, animal husbandry and feedlots, and monocropping, has really led to a increase in carbon emissions and a decrease in carbon sequestration, and actually a reliance on very specific food sources that I think COVID has brought forth to us in a very harsh reality. Beef prices are going out of sight right now, which may be better for all of us if we can reduce our consumption. So as Sophie said, beef is the biggest target. It makes up 40, I think it's a little blurred at the end, but beef makes up 41% of all the livestock emissions. Of all the emissions from all livestock, 41% comes from beef. Move to the next slide. I like the menus of change. I've been working on it for a long time. I got to give a shout out to Boston College. That was the last place I was at. I may have omitted that in my bio. Not intentionally, clearly. So menus of change that we've been doing for years. I think it's a great roadmap. I want to look at three targets off of this infographic. One is celebrate cultural diversity and discovery. Two is reward better agricultural practices. And three is serve less red meat less often. Next slide. We do that at Google with really three core pillars. We are looking to purchase more diverse ingredients, which is agrobiodiversity, and I'll dig into that a little bit more. When purchasing animal protein, we're very intentful. We have a real plan and a standard that we adhere to. And finally, we offer a more balanced plant-forward diet. So if we go to the next slide. Agrobiodiversity is a combination of growing, it's coupled with regenerative agriculture. It's how to grow multiple crops in synergy with each other so that you can have less soil inputs like nitrogen and less pesticides. Monocropping has created such a need for pesticides and soil additives that it's really stripped the ground, and you can see it in the dirt that comes up with the roots of plants. So at Google, we're actually working with fonio, which is an ancient grain from West Africa, which supports a diverse ethnic population of farmers, many women. We are working with amaranth in South America, and we're doing millet in Asia. And these are grains that have been around for millennia, but we've kind of lost our way. So it's good to bring them back. Distribution does get in the way of that, as in all things. And then as we move to animal protein purchases, we're very intentful. It needs to be barn raised. It needs to have targeted antibiotics, no sweeping antibiotics, no growth hormones. We also, beyond just carbon emissions, we're worried about worker welfare and animal welfare. So those are in our standards. This discussion is about carbon, so we'll stick with that. Some of the livestock practices are of regen farming have made significant impacts. If we look at General Mills has committed to 1 million acres of crop and farmland and ranch lands by 2030 to be regen farmed. And they actually have white oak pastures in Georgia that a study by Qantas in 2019, published in 2019, shows that they've got the cattle at this ranch, white oak pastures, to a negative 3.5 kilograms of greenhouse gases per kilogram of beef. So we're below carbon emission on that. It means their farming style is actually getting it back into the soil. It's sequestering it. At Google, we actually did a lot with animal proteins, and a lot of this was in conjunction with WRI and Sophie. We do what we call a flip. So a flip is adding things to the protein, the animal protein, to extend it and to minimize the impact. You can get many of you are familiar with this in a burger form that you can buy through various vendors. We actually call it an umami burger and created a recipe for ground beef and mushrooms, and then had a co-packer manufacture it. In London, they took the same thought. We do the burger, and they also do a pork sausage with broad beans and black eyed peas. And I do think broad beans are really making a resurgence of a plant forward, satisfying. It's got flavor and mouthfeel and really works well. So in London, we actually reduced beef consumption by 59% from 2017 to 2019, which is enormous. In Sao Paulo, we dropped it 46%, and it's a very beef-centric country. We did this. We track all animal protein by quarter by top 25 locations, and then make informed decisions on a protein strategy based on that. I want to note, very light-handed when we do this. It is customer choice. It is not a force, and we do not want to polarize our consumer by removing things. So we did see a slight uptick in chicken, but that was okay because it doesn't have nearly the carbon footprint that cattle does. Next slide, please. And then finally, we really embrace plant forward as a concept. So many chefs will know to put the buffet line with rice first and potatoes first and the vegetables second, and then the meat's always at the end. But we do that from a price standpoint. We're now doing it intentionally from a behavioral science standpoint. Customers make different choices. Consumers, if you can lure them in with sights and sounds and smells and wording, then they might try something. We are not trying to make people vegetarians. We're trying to make more flexitarians. And we find that the menu wording is enormous in that. And we've done a lot of work on menu wording. And if you see the rainbow colored grilled vegetables with sumac, that's much better than a vegetable salad. And it may have seen Michael Bacher and Mark Erickson last week talk about the Plant Forward Certification Initiative, and that Google and the Culinary Institute of America are working together on. That is going to be a culinary standard for the industry, hopefully launching in 2021. That's to deepen culinary skill. We really think that we've trained all these cooks and chefs and culinarians to be meat focused. Now we need to give them tools to be plant focused. And if it's delicious and craveable, then our customers and consumers will go there first. Next slide. So I want to leave you with some tips for success. We really focus on more diverse crops. We work with our distributors and vendors and various accelerators across the country to really try to aggregate that so that you can, when you're regenerative farming, you can't quite get the volume you need when you're feeding 300,000 people worldwide, so you need to aggregate it. We've gotten creative with purchases. We're incorporating new ingredients in pop-ups and kitchens, teaching kitchens, and we really want to get our ethnically diverse staff involved. So I leave you with this: be adventurous and stay informed.
That was perfect, Michael. Sorry, we were starting to get short on time, and I wanted to make sure that we had some time for questions and discussion. So thank you so much to Michael, and we've brought back Sophie to chat with us as well. We've already got some questions. I have some questions for you, but we've already got some questions coming in from our attendees. So actually, I see Christina Bodanza has been brave and wants to join me on stage. Let's see if we can bring Christina up to ask her question. Sometimes this works and sometimes I lose them in the ether. Hello, Christina.
Christina.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us. What is your question for our presenters today?
You know, I was really impressed with Sophie and Michael. I do know Michael from a previous adventure. We were part of the CAIP class back in 2013, 14. Seems like forever ago. So we did a lot with innovation in the CAIP. Obviously, that's what its purpose was. And what I really loved about the message you're giving is that it's not about trying to change people or condition people that choice, so they're really changing themselves. I'm in senior living. I work for Compass Group, and we always fight with our residents because they're always looking for meat, right? They're the silent generation. Where's the meat? Where's the meat on my plate? But for instance, the umami burger, if we were to say, here's a farmer burger that would have this other ingredient, whether it's mushrooms or a grain, and it still looks like a big, thick 8-ounce patty, they're going to love it. They're going to love it. They're going to eat it. They're going to try it. They're going to rave about it. It's going to have a lot more flavor because there's more layers involved in it. And it's going to be a success. But if we say, here's a mushroom burger and it's a 2-ounce patty with 2 ounces of mushrooms on top, there's obviously going to be pushback. So I really love that message, and I love the idea of the way that we're presenting it. It's not a veggie burger. It's not a blended burger. It's a new name that has deliciousness in that, and that way we're really able to market it as well. So I appreciate all the hard work that everybody's done.
We found mushrooms are too polarizing. That can't be the word used.
Oh, that's interesting. Thank you so much for joining us, Christina.
Yeah.
And actually, I wonder, both Sophie and Michael, the work that you're doing, or Sophie, this really speaks to the research that you've done in terms of the kind of terminology. It's not like you can just, add extra words to a dish and that makes it more compelling. Your research has actually shown that there are sort of very specific kinds of words or very specific kinds of technique or imagery to evoke for people.
Yeah, it's been, as our studies showed, some of the names that we thought would be really good bombed, and other ones worked really well. I think the way we've narrowed down the learnings is some of the things that seem to be particularly important are emphasis on taste, emphasis on provenance, so some kind of exotic or kind of heritage words around provenance, and just kind of upselling the mouthfeel and kind of the real positives of the dish, whereas other types of language, for example, talking about the health benefits don't seem to work quite as well. So yeah, descriptive language, you've got to be a little bit careful about what you mean by that.
Thank you so much, Sophie. And Michael, I was going to ask you to share some practical examples from Google, but I'm afraid this slide coming up is telling us that we are out of time. So I think that's just going to give all of our attendees extra reason to reach out to you to ask about the Google experience. And so thank you so much to both Sophie and Michael for joining us today. I'm sorry that we didn't have more time for the discussion, but let me go to what I need to talk about here. A huge thank you to both of them for sharing so many great insights with us.
We are now going into a networking break sponsored by Nestle
And we're going into the
Professional.
networking break.
Hopefully you all had a chance to make the za'atar, ragu, and hummus from the recipe shared on Monday so that we can virtually share a snack even though we aren't all together. You can use the tabs on the left of your screen to check out a range of ways to engage with everyone who is also attending today. In our Sessions tab, we have a special presentation at this break, a live demo celebrating protein diversity with Nestle Professional representatives Cassie Hoover and Chef Logan McCoy, sponsored by Nestle Professional. Throughout all of these activities, we hope you'll ask questions and join the conversation by clicking the green Share Audio and Video button in the Expo and Breakout sessions. In addition to our event chat, you can direct message any participant by searching for their name under the People tab. A red dot and number next to the envelope on the top right will indicate that you have a new message waiting. When in conversation with another attendee, connect live by clicking the Invite to Video Call button, which will populate a link. Our networking feature matches you with another attendee for a quick 4-minute chat. Today's networking question is, have you experienced interruptions in purchasing since the pandemic? We encourage you to meet a few new connections each week, just as you might strike up a conversation at the coffee station. At the end of one session, click the Ready button again to be paired with another attendee. We encourage you to check out the Expo tab to visit with our sponsors, to watch live demos, hear about new product developments, consumer insights, sustainable operations, or thank them for their support of Menus of Change. And for those of you who are missing the sampling aspects of our in-person programs, head to the virtual tasting booth in the Expo, where you can register your interest in a product sample and virtual tasting experience. The sponsors featured and their theme programming will change week to week, so we hope you'll stop by there often. The themes for this week are listed here. Lastly, don't forget that you are entered in a raffle for each activity you engage in. And if you attend and participate in all 6 weeks, you'll have a chance to win free registration and travel to next year's Menus of Change Leadership Summit in Hyde Park, New York. We'll be resuming programming on the Stage tab at 11:35 a.m. Pacific, 2:35 p.m. Eastern. So go enjoy networking and the expo until then.